They say most people spend their lives chasing shadows, attention, approval, the feeling of being enough. But what if the secret to everything you want isn't out there at all? What if it's been sitting inside you this whole time, waiting for you to stop running and finally listen? That's where this story begins, not in a boardroom or a big city, but in a small town with a man who finally got tired of chasing everything that didn't matter. The story begins. Ethan Miller wasn't lazy. He wasn't unmotivated. He just couldn't stop scrolling through everyone else's life. Every morning started the same. He'd wake up, grab his phone, and before he'd even taken his first sip of coffee, his mind was already somewhere else, in somebody else's world. His old classmate just bought a new house. His coworker was in Cabo again. His cousin launched a business that seemed to be taking off. Meanwhile, Ethan was sitting in his kitchen, wearing the same tired t-shirt, wondering why nothing in his life ever seemed to move. It wasn't that he didn't want success. He just didn't know where to start anymore. The more he looked at what others were doing, the less he believed he could do anything himself. He didn't realize it then, but that was the beginning of his downfall, not from failure, but from distraction. The stranger in the cafe. On rainy Thursday, Ethan ducked into a small coffee shop on Main Street. He sat in the corner, sipping his usual black coffee, lost in thought, scrolling aimlessly through his feed. That's when an old man sat down across from him, uninvited, calm, and smiling. He looked like someone who'd seen more than most people ever do, wrinkles that told stories, eyes that saw right through you. "You've been staring at other people's lives so long," the old man said. "You've forgotten what your own looks like." Ethan blinked. "Do I know you?" The old man chuckled. "Not yet. But I know what you're feeling. I used to chase everyone's approval too, until I learned what Napoleon Hill once wrote. You can't climb another man's mountain and expect to find your own peak." Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," the man said, leaning forward, "you're wasting your power. Every ounce of energy you give to watching others, comparing yourself, proving yourself, that's energy you could be using to build yourself. You're not tired, son. You're scattered." The words landed harder than Ethan expected. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew it was true. The mirror moment, the old man slid something across the table, a small pocket notebook, worn and faded. On the cover were 3 words. "Focus builds fortunes. Every great builder started by mastering himself," the man said. "You want to know why people never change? Because they never focus long enough to finish anything that matters. They chase everything and catch nothing." Ethan ran his fingers over the notebook. "So what do I do with this?" "Start writing," the man said. "Not about what others are doing. Write what you want, not the version you post online, but the version you'd build if no one was watching." Before Ethan could ask his name, the old man stood, placed a few dollars on the table, and walked out into the rain. Ethan never saw him again. The first decision that night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, phone face down, notebook open. The silence felt heavy. He wrote one sentence. "I will stop chasing people and start building myself." He didn't know it yet, but that single decision, quiet, small, almost invisible, would change everything. He began to see how much of his life he had given away to comparison. Every minute watching someone else's success was a minute he could have spent building his own. Every time he worried about who noticed him, he was losing focus on what mattered: his craft, his health, his mind. It hit him. He wasn't behind. He was just distracted. The shift over the next week, Ethan made small changes. He deleted the apps that drained him. He stopped checking who liked his posts. He started walking every morning, using that time to think instead of scroll. The world didn't clap. No one noticed. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt something new: clarity. Napoleon Hill once said, "You are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul." Ethan began to understand what that meant. He didn't need more attention. He needed more attention on himself. Each morning, he'd ask one question. "What will I build today?" At first, his answers were small: read a chapter, write a page, finish one task without distraction. But those small victories began to pile up. And slowly, the man who used to measure his worth through others started to measure it through effort. The lesson weeks passed. Ethan wasn't a different man yet, but he was becoming one. He no longer felt jealous when he saw others succeed. He felt inspired. Because now, He was moving too. He realized something simple but powerful. The world respects those who stay on their path. And for the first time in his life, Ethan finally had one. He wasn't chasing noise anymore. He was chasing growth. End of part 1. The turning point. In the next part, Ethan will learn the power of guarding his energy, how solitude, discipline, and silence become the foundations of strength. He'll discover that success isn't about being seen, it's about being built. Would you like me to continue with part 2? The power of solitude. Next 1000 words in the same Napoleon Hill inspired storytelling style. Part 2. The power of solitude. Look, there comes a point when you realize not everyone will understand the road you're walking down. They'll ask why you work when they rest, why you stay home when they go out, why you've gone quiet. But silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of transformation. And for Ethan Miller, silence was about to become his greatest teacher. The quiet shift. It had been 3 months since Ethan met the old man in the cafe, the one who handed him the small notebook that said, "Focus builds fortunes." At first, Ethan wrote in it only when he felt inspired. But soon, it became his daily ritual. Each night, before going to bed, he would write one line about what he did to build himself that day. He didn't post quotes anymore. He didn't check who liked his work. Instead, he started building a quiet life. At first, the silence felt strange, like walking into an empty house. But slowly, that emptiness began to feel peaceful. He realized something simple. You can't hear your own thoughts when you're surrounded by noise. Every day, people around him were rushing, scrolling, chasing. But Ethan was beginning to slow down. He was learning that growth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. The friends who didn't understand. One Friday night, his old friends called him. "Come out, man! You've been ghosting us. We barely see you anymore." Ethan hesitated. He'd been working on a small side project, a writing idea he'd been dreaming about for years. He wanted to stay home and finish it, but a part of him felt guilty. He didn't want to seem distant or arrogant. Then, he remembered something the old man said that day in the cafe. "You'll never build something great if you're afraid of being misunderstood." So Ethan smiled and said, "Not tonight, guys. I've got something to finish." They laughed. "Man, you're always working. Loosen up a little." He laughed too, but when he hung up, he didn't feel bad. Because deep down, he knew he wasn't losing friends. He was finding focus. The lonely hours the next few weeks tested him. There were nights when he sat at his desk, exhausted, wondering if any of this was worth it. His phone buzzed with messages, but he left it face down. The silence pressed on him like weight. One night, as rain tapped softly on his window, doubt crept in. What if this doesn't work? What if I'm wasting my time? That's when he opened his notebook and read something he had written earlier. Focus demands isolation. Growth demands silence. He realized that solitude wasn't a punishment. It was the price of becoming. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Great achievement is usually born of great sacrifice." Ethan looked around his small apartment, quiet, simple, no distractions, and smiled. This was the sacrifice. And it was worth it. The battle within the hardest fights weren't against the world. They were against his own mind. There were mornings when he woke up tired and heard that whisper. "You've done enough. Rest. You can do it later." But he'd learned that those whispers were traps. They were the enemies of progress. So instead of giving in, he stood up, poured his coffee, and said out loud, "I don't need motivation. I need movement." That became his new mantra. Every time his mind told him to stop, he went harder. Every time doubt tried to speak, he drowned it out with action. It wasn't easy. But he was building something far more powerful than success. He was building discipline. The invisible progress days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Ethan started waking up earlier, writing before work, studying after dinner. No one saw what he was doing. His phone was quiet, his evenings long, but his mind had never been sharper. At first, it seemed like nothing was happening, no big breakthrough, no applause. But small changes began to appear. His thinking became clearer, his confidence stronger, his goals sharper, and though no one else saw it, Ethan could feel it. That inner growth Napoleon Hill talked about. The kind that doesn't show right away, but transforms everything it touches. He was becoming the moment of clarity one morning. As the sun rose over the town, Ethan sat by his window, holding his notebook. He realized how far he had come. He wasn't chasing people anymore. He wasn't begging for attention. He wasn't comparing his life to anyone else's. He had found something far better. Peace. Not the lazy kind of peace that comes from doing nothing, but the earned kind. The kind that comes when you control your mind instead of being ruled by it. He wrote in his notebook. Focus is freedom. The moment you stop being pulled by every distraction, you begin to own your life. He finally understood what the old man meant that day. The world tries to pull you into noise because noise keeps you weak. But silence builds strength. The transformation that night, Ethan took a walk through the same street where he once felt lost. The cafe lights glowed softly. He wondered if he'd ever see that old man again. But as he passed the window, he smiled. He didn't need him anymore. The answers were no longer out there. They were inside. He had learned how to be alone without being lonely. He had learned that focus wasn't about cutting people out. It was about cutting distractions out. And in that quiet, something unshakable was being built. Purpose. Lesson of Part 2. Napoleon Hill taught that discipline is the bridge between thought and accomplishment. Ethan was walking that bridge now, step by step, day by day. He didn't crave noise anymore. He craved progress. He didn't need validation. He needed vision. He was beginning to understand that the world belongs to the focused, not the loud, not the distracted, but the ones who walk their path quietly, every single day. And though no one else could see it yet, Ethan was becoming unstoppable. End of Part 2. The Power of Solitude. Backhand index pointing right in Part 3. The Discipline Code. Ethan will discover how to train his mind like a muscle, how every decision, every habit, every small choice can either build or break his destiny. It's where focus turns into fire. Would you like me to write Part 3? The Discipline Code. 1,000 words, next in the same storytelling style? Part 3. The Discipline Code. Look, most people wait for motivation to find them. But what if motivation never comes? What if the only way to move forward is to start before you feel ready? That's where discipline begins. And that's where Ethan Miller was about to discover the real power behind every great success story. The fire inside it had been months since Ethan began walking the quiet path. He'd learned to sit with silence. He'd learned to listen to himself. But now, a new challenge appeared, staying consistent when no one was watching. At first, he thought discipline meant doing big things, working late nights, waking up before sunrise. But soon, he realized that discipline wasn't about doing more, it was about not stopping. Every morning, he stood by his window, coffee in hand, and asked himself, what can I do today to build the man I want to become? It wasn't always glamorous. Some days, it was just showing up to his desk, typing a single sentence, or pushing through one more page of his notes. But something was changing inside him. A quiet confidence was replacing the old doubt. He was beginning to understand what Napoleon Hill meant when he said, the man who does more than he is paid for will soon be paid for more than he does. Ethan was doing more, not for money, not for recognition, but for mastery. The moment of truth. One cold morning, Ethan's alarm went off at 5:00 a.m. He groaned, rolled over, and stared at the ceiling. His mind whispered, sleep a little longer. You've earned it. But another voice, quieter but stronger, said, get up. You said you wanted this. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, caught between comfort and commitment. And then he remembered something the old man from the cafe once said. The world rewards those who work, not those who wait. So Ethan stood up. That single action, standing up when it was easier to stay down, became the beginning of his transformation. From that morning on, he started calling it the Discipline Code, a promise to do what needed to be done, whether he felt like it or not. The rules of the code. In his notebook, he wrote 3 simple rules. 1. Start without waiting for motivation. 2. Do it fully or not at all. 3. Never break the chain, not even once. Each day, he followed those rules. He stopped negotiating with his excuses. When his mind said, tomorrow, he said, now. When it said, you're tired, he said, then grow stronger. At first, the discipline felt heavy, like lifting weights he couldn't carry. But as weeks passed, it became easier. He realized that discipline was just like a muscle. The more he used it, the stronger it got. And slowly, something began to happen. His focus turned into fire. The test. One Friday evening, Ethan came home exhausted from his day job. He threw his bag on the floor and almost skipped his writing session. Just one night off, he thought. You deserve it. He opened his phone to check the time, and saw a quote he had written months ago on his wallpaper. Every time you say tomorrow, you hand your dreams over to fear. He froze. He knew this was a test, not from the world, but from himself. And so, even though his body screamed no, he sat down and started typing. The first few minutes were painful. His mind wandered. His energy was gone. But then something clicked. The words began to flow, his ideas sharpened, his energy returned. When he finally looked up, 2 hours had passed, and in front of him was one of the best pieces of work he'd ever written. That night, Ethan didn't just write. He won. The truth about focus. In the following days, Ethan began to notice something new. He didn't crave comfort anymore. He craved progress. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to others. He wanted to prove himself to himself. Focus was no longer a word. It was a way of living. He stopped saying yes to every request. He learned to say no, not because he was rude, but because he was clear. He understood what Napoleon Hill meant when he said, "A man is the master of his fate only when he learns to master his time." He started guarding his time like treasure. And no wasted hours. No meaningless conversations. No scrolling through lives that weren't his. Ethan began to live on purpose. The transformation of the mind. There were still hard days, moments when he doubted everything. But he learned that the mind could be trained. When it said, "Stop," he said, "Go harder." When it said, "You're not enough," he said, "I'm becoming." And slowly, his thoughts began to obey him. He realized that discipline wasn't just about habits, it was about identity. Each time he chose work over comfort, he became someone new. Each time he pushed through resistance, he grew stronger. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Self-discipline begins with the mastery of your thoughts." Ethan now understood, success wasn't about luck. It was about focus, discipline, and the refusal to quit. The breakthrough. 6 months into his journey, Ethan looked around and realized how much had changed. He had built a routine that worked. He had finished his first manuscript, something he had only dreamed of before. He had more energy, more peace, more direction. And the most powerful part? He didn't need validation from anyone. He had become his own source of energy, his own guide. He had learned to keep his circle small, his goals clear, his mind sharp. He was no longer chasing approval. He was chasing mastery. The lesson of the code. That night, Ethan sat with his notebook and wrote one final line for the day. Discipline gives you power. Focus gives you freedom. Together, they build your destiny. He realized that focus wasn't about shutting the world out. It was about tuning himself in. Every sacrifice, every silent night, every lonely morning had been shaping something unbreakable within him. The man who once chased others was now leading himself. And though the world hadn't noticed yet, he knew it soon would. Because the world always bends for those who refuse to break. End of Part 3. The Discipline Code. Backhand index pointing right in Part 4. The Battle Within. Ethan will face his toughest challenge yet. When his own mind begins to test how badly he truly wants to rise. It's the chapter where doubt meets determination. And one will have to win. Would you like me to write Part 4? The Battle Within. 1,000 words. Next, continuing Ethan's Napoleon Hill style transformation story? Fire Part 4. The Battle Within. Inspired by Napoleon Hill's philosophy, story style, 1,000 words. Hook. They say the loudest battles are fought on the outside, between armies, rivals, or nations. But the greatest war of all is the one you fight within. It's the war between the part of you that wants to grow and the part that whispers, "Take it easy, you've done enough." Most people lose that war quietly, every single day. But not everyone. Some learn to master their minds, and in doing so, they master life. The story begins. Marcus sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, staring at a wall covered in old notes and unfinished dreams. The clock read 3:17 a.m. His friends were long asleep. The city outside was silent, but inside his mind, chaos reigned. He felt tired, not from work, but from fighting the voice inside that kept saying, "Why are you doing all this? What if it never works?" He closed his eyes and heard the same voice Napoleon Hill once called the invisible enemy within. Hill wrote that every man must conquer the 6 basic fears: fear of poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. Marcus realized that all of those fears lived in him. He wasn't lazy, he was trapped. Trapped by thoughts that told him to settle. But that night felt different. That night, he whispered to himself, "No more waiting. No more fear." The visit from the mentor. The next morning, Marcus met with his old mentor, Mr. Lawson, a retired businessman who had lived through failure and fortune alike. Lawson was a student of Napoleon Hill's philosophy. His shelves were filled with worn copies of Think and Grow Rich and The Law of Success. Marcus poured out his frustration. "I work hard, I plan, I stay disciplined, but sometimes it feels like I'm standing still. Like I'm fighting something I can't see." Lawson smiled and said, "You are fighting something invisible, Marcus. You're fighting your own thoughts. The human mind is both the greatest servant and the deadliest master. Until you learn to command it, you'll always feel at war." He leaned forward, voice steady. "You don't need more motivation. You need control. You must direct your focus as a general directs an army. Every thought, every action must serve a definite purpose." Marcus frowned. "But how do I control thoughts? They just come." Lawson chuckled softly. "No, they don't just come, you invite them. You attract them through the vibration of your belief. Hill taught us, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But what he didn't say outright is that you must guard your mind like a fortress. Every negative thought is a spy, trying to open your gates." Those words struck deep. Marcus realized that his problem wasn't lack of work, it was lack of mental discipline. The mental shift. That week, Marcus made a pact with himself. Every time a negative thought appeared, "You're not good enough, you'll fail, no one cares," he would stop, breathe, and replace it with a command. "I am in control of my mind. I direct my focus where I choose." At first, it felt silly. But slowly, something began to shift. The more he practiced, the less power the negative voice had. He started writing his goals daily, just as Napoleon Hill advised. He visualized success not as a fantasy, but as a certainty he was walking toward, and with each day of focus, his energy grew. The test of distraction. But then came the test. One Friday evening, his friends invited him out, the kind of night that promised laughter, noise, and forgetfulness. Marcus almost said yes. After all, hadn't he earned a break? But then he remembered Lawson's words. "Focus is the price of freedom." He stayed home instead. He turned off his phone, opened his notebook, and went back to work on his project, a self-improvement course he'd been developing for months. Hours passed. The city outside roared with life, but Marcus felt something stronger than pleasure, peace. For the first time, he wasn't missing out. He was leveling up. The inner voice returns. Still, the voice of doubt wasn't gone. One night, it came back with force. "You're wasting your youth," it hissed. "You could be happy right now, if you just stopped chasing this fantasy." Marcus looked in the mirror and said aloud, "I'd rather struggle for my dream than relax into regret." He saw a reflection not of exhaustion, but of transformation. His eyes looked different, focused, calm, dangerous in their determination. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Your only limitation is the one you set up in your own mind." Marcus now understood that his true work wasn't building wealth or success. It was mastering his mind. The breakthrough moment. Weeks later, something shifted again, this time on the outside. The small online course Marcus had quietly been building began to gain traction. People started signing up. Messages poured in from strangers saying his work inspired them. It wasn't luck. It was focus, multiplied over time. Marcus didn't celebrate with parties or distractions. He celebrated by refining his craft, sharpening his system, and deepening his purpose. He now saw that discipline wasn't punishment, it was power. The silence he once feared had become his greatest ally. The lesson, Napoleon Hill's truth. Marcus learned the same truth Hill discovered interviewing 500 of the world's most successful people. Success is never a matter of chance. It is always the result of controlled thought, directed focus, and unwavering persistence. The world outside is a mirror of the mind within. When the inner war ends, the outer victories begin. Marcus's life began to change, not overnight, but inevitably. People who once doubted him now asked for advice. Friends who mocked his discipline now admired his peace. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. His results spoke louder than his words. Closing thought. And so, as the sun rose one quiet morning, Marcus wrote in his journal. Focus is freedom. Discipline is peace. Mastery is self-control. He closed the notebook, smiled, and whispered, not to the world, but to himself. The war is not over, but I'm winning. End of Part 4. Part 5 will continue the story as Marcus begins to apply the mastermind principle, building alliances, influence, and purpose-driven leadership in his journey towards success. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, The Mastermind Awakening, 1,000 words, next in the same style? Napoleon Hill inspired story, easy and powerful for American readers? Fire Part 5. The Mastermind Awakening. Inspired by Napoleon Hill's philosophy, story style, 1,000 words, hook, no man ever reached greatness alone. Every towering success story is built not only on focus and discipline but also on connection, the joining of minds that think alike and dream alike. Napoleon Hill called this sacred alliance the mastermind principle, the invisible force that turns individual effort into unstoppable power. Marcus was about to discover that even the most determined lone warrior eventually needs an army, not of followers, but of thinkers. The story begins. It had been 6 months since Marcus turned his life around. His days were structured, his mind sharp, his purpose clear. The online course he created was gaining traction. He had paying students now, people who looked up to him, who wanted to learn what he had learned. But something inside him felt limited. He was growing, yes, but slowly. Every problem, every idea, every decision came from his own head. He began to feel the weight of isolation again, not the kind that distracts, but the kind that limits potential. One morning, while reading Think and Grow Rich, a line stopped him cold. No two minds ever come together without thereby creating a third, invisible, intangible force which may be likened to a third mind. Marcus underlined it twice. He realized he had mastered focus, but he had not yet mastered collaboration. The search for alignment. Marcus decided to find people who shared his vision, not dreamers who only talked, but doers who believed in growth, in discipline, in the power of the mind. At first, it wasn't easy. Most people wanted quick results, easy money, and constant comfort. But after weeks of searching, he met 2 individuals who stood out. Evelyn, a writer who had left her corporate job to inspire others through personal development books. James, a quiet programmer who believed success was a science, not luck. Their first meeting was simple: a coffee shop, 3 notebooks, and a shared hunger for progress. Marcus began. We all want to build something that lasts. But none of us can see every angle alone. What if we combined our focus, our energy, into one powerful direction? Evelyn smiled. You're talking about synergy. Marcus grinned. I'm talking about what Napoleon Hill called a mastermind. The birth of the mastermind group. They decided to meet every Sunday morning, no excuses. Each meeting began with silence. They would take 5 minutes to visualize their goals, breathing deeply, centering their minds. Then they would speak, not about gossip or news, but about growth. Each person shared what they were working on, what roadblocks they faced, and what lessons they had learned. No one was allowed to complain without also presenting a solution. At first, the group was small and quiet. But soon, something remarkable began to happen. Ideas started flowing, not from one person, but from between them. Marcus noticed that after each session, his creativity doubled. Evelyn's writing became sharper. James began building a new tool that could automate parts of their workflow. It felt as if an unseen intelligence was guiding them. The very third mind Hill had described. The power of collective energy. One Sunday, Marcus hit a wall. His business had plateaued. He felt frustrated and unsure what to do next. When he shared this with the group, Evelyn leaned forward. You're thinking too small, she said. You're focusing on income, not impact. What if you turned your course into a full mentorship program? James added. And I could build a digital platform to host it, something scalable. Marcus blinked. You think we could do that? Evelyn smiled. Together? Yes. That day, their meeting stretched from 1 hour to 5. By the end, they had outlined an entire new vision, a program that combined Marcus's discipline, Evelyn's storytelling, and James's technology. The next month, they launched it. Within weeks, their audience tripled. The synergy between them created momentum none of them could have achieved alone. The lesson from Mr. Lawson. When Marcus told his mentor, Mr. Lawson, about the group's success, the old man's eyes gleamed. "Now you understand the true law of success," Lawson said. "Hill discovered it after decades of study. The greatest minds in history always worked in harmony with others. Edison had his engineers. Henry Ford had his thinkers. Carnegie built empires through the minds of his team." He paused. "Success doesn't come from independence, it comes from interdependence. When two or more minds unite in harmony, they create a power that can't be measured by logic." Marcus nodded slowly. "I used to think being strong meant doing it all myself." Lawson smiled. "No, Marcus. Being strong means knowing when to invite others into your vision." The growth of the movement. Over the following months, their mastermind group became a movement. They began inviting others, people serious about growth, not just curious about it. Every new member had to commit to the same principles. 1. Absolute honesty. Point 2. No negativity. Point 3. Definite purpose. Point 4. Accountability to action. Soon, they had 10 members, writers, designers, entrepreneurs, dreamers, all connected by one shared vibration, purpose. Every Sunday morning, they filled that coffee shop with energy so high it felt electric. They discussed strategy, read passages from Think and Grow Rich, and pushed one another past comfort. The results were staggering. One member doubled her income in 90 days. Another quit his job to start his own company. Marcus himself began receiving invitations to speak at events. The more they helped one another, the faster they all rose. The spiritual discovery. One evening, after another long meeting, Marcus walked home feeling something deeper than pride, peace. He realized that success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about energy, the invisible link between minds in harmony. Hill had said it perfectly. When a group of individual brains are coordinated and function in harmony, the increased energy created through that alliance becomes available to every individual in the group. Marcus understood now that the mastermind wasn't just a strategy. It was a spiritual law. The lesson: you can work alone and go fast. But if you want to go far, you must unite with others who burn with the same fire. Marcus once believed solitude was strength. But now, he saw that while silence builds discipline, collaboration builds destiny. The same focus that made him powerful now made him magnetic. He attracted people who shared his vision. And together, they became something greater, a force of creation that refused to stop. Closing thought. As their movement grew, Marcus stood before his team one evening and said, "This is what Napoleon Hill meant when he spoke of the mastermind. It's not just a meeting, it's a miracle. It's what happens when people believe in one another enough to live together." He paused and smiled. "Alone, we were sparks. Together, we're a fire." End of Part 5. Part 6, the final chapter, will reveal the summit of mastery, where Marcus learns that true success is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of legacy. Would you like me to continue with Part 6, the summit of mastery, final part, 1,000 words, now? Fire. Part 6. The summit of mastery. Inspired by Napoleon Hill's philosophy, story style, 1,000 words, hook. Every mountain climber knows that the final stretch is the hardest. The air thins, the path narrows, and one wrong step can send you tumbling back to where you began. Success is no different. Most people quit right before they reach the summit, not because they can't climb, but because they forget why they started. Marcus had reached the edge of his greatest breakthrough. But this time, the test wasn't about focus or discipline. It was about purpose. The story begins. A year had passed since Marcus formed the mastermind group. What started as a small circle in a coffee shop had grown into a global community of thinkers, builders, and dreamers. People from all over the country tuned in every week to learn how to control their minds, direct their focus, and build lives with intention. The results were staggering: new businesses, published books, lives transformed. Marcus had become what Napoleon Hill once called a practical dreamer, someone who turns thought into form. But with growth came new pressure. The group wanted expansion. Investors reached out. Invitations to speak flooded his inbox. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the pull of chaos again. The noise he once escaped was creeping back. Only now, it came disguised as opportunity. He sat in his office one evening, surrounded by awards and proposals. His phone buzzed with notifications, yet he felt strangely empty. He had everything he once prayed for, but something was missing. The return to silence. That night, Marcus remembered something his old mentor, Mr. Lawson, had once said. "Son, if you ever feel lost in your success, return to your silence. The answers you seek never shout, they whisper." So Marcus did what few successful people ever dared to do. He disappeared for a week. No phone. No meetings. No noise. Just him, a cabin in the woods, and his thoughts. The first 2 days were hard. His mind kept racing, his hands itched to check messages. But by the third day, the noise began to fade. He spent hours reading Think and Grow Rich, not as a student this time, but as a man searching for understanding. When he reached the final chapter, he stopped at one line that seemed to glow on the page. "The starting point of all achievement is desire." Desire, the spark that started it all. He had been so focused on maintaining success that he'd forgotten the fire that birthed it. The vision reawakens. Marcus walked outside, staring at the sunrise. The air was cold, crisp, alive. He whispered to himself. "It's not about building bigger, it's about building deeper." That was the missing piece. His vision had become about results, not impact. About numbers, not transformation. He realized that the final level of mastery was not control over others. It was control over self. He spent the next few days rewriting his vision. He didn't want just a brand, he wanted a legacy. He wanted to teach others to think, not what to think, but how. When he returned home, he called Evelyn and James. "We've been building outward," he said. "It's time to build inward. It's time to help people become creators, not consumers." They agreed. The next phase of their mission began. The power of purpose. They launched a new initiative, the Mastermind Academy. It wasn't about selling dreams or chasing motivation. It was about teaching people to harness the principles of Napoleon Hill: desire, faith, persistence, imagination, and focus. Every lesson began with one truth. You already possess everything you need. The power is in your mind. Students began sharing stories, single mothers starting businesses, veterans overcoming fear, young entrepreneurs building with clarity. Marcus watched it all unfold with awe. For the first time, he wasn't chasing success. He was channeling it. He understood now what Hill meant when he wrote, "Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve." That wasn't just motivation. It was law, spiritual law, the test of legacy. Months later, Marcus received news that Mr. Lawson had passed away. The mentor who had guided his journey was gone. At the funeral, Marcus stood beside the old man's gravestone and whispered, "You taught me how to think, not what to think. I owe everything to that." He remembered something Lawson once said. "The greatest return on your success is the number of people you lift with it." That night, Marcus made a promise. He would dedicate his life to spreading the principles that had changed his own. The Mastermind Academy became more than a business, it became a movement. They hosted free workshops, mentorship programs, and community events. The ripple kept growing, one focused mind at a time. The secret of the summit. One evening, during a live seminar, a young man asked Marcus, "Sir, how do you know when you've made it? When does success feel complete?" Marcus smiled. "That's the trick," he said softly. "Success isn't a destination. It's a state of mind. It's not about reaching the top, it's about growing so strong that you can lift others with you." He continued, "The moment you stop growing, you begin to fade. The summit isn't a place, it's a direction. You climb not to reach the top, but to see how far you can rise." The audience was silent. Every word landed like a seed. The final revelation. That night, after the event, Marcus sat by the window of his hotel room. City lights shimmered below. He thought about his journey, the loneliness, the struggle, the focus, the silence, the power of the mastermind, and the transformation of purpose. He realized Napoleon Hill was never just teaching about money. He was teaching about mindset. About the invisible bridge between thought and reality. Marcus whispered, "Hill was right all along. Success is not something you chase. It's something you attract by the person you become." And at that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt since the beginning. Peace. Not the peace of stillness, but the peace of knowing he had found his purpose. The legacy lives on, Years later, people still talked about Marcus and the Mastermind Academy. New leaders had risen, inspired by his teachings. His quotes were shared across schools, businesses, and homes. Focus is freedom. Discipline is self-respect. You cannot grow by watching others, you grow by mastering yourself. He had become what Napoleon Hill described as a man who has found his definite major purpose. And though Marcus eventually grew old, his message never did. It spread across generations, touching millions of minds, reminding them that the greatest power in the world is the power to control your own thoughts. Final words: the summit of mastery. Success begins with a dream. It grows with faith. It strengthens with persistence. It expands through the mastermind, and it endures through purpose. Marcus had climbed the mountain. But as he stood at the top, he didn't see an ending. He saw a new horizon. He smiled and said quietly, "The journey was never about reaching the summit. It was about becoming the kind of person who could." And with that, he walked forward, focused, fearless, and free. The end. A Napoleon Hill inspired story about focus, growth, and the inner transformation that leads to true mastery.